I do want to talk more about the polls themselves, though, because we have seen a lot of those coming in over the past several months. And I mean, we've seen them for decades and decades. Cliff Young is a visiting professor of political science at Texas A&M University and a pollster at Ipsos, joining us now live. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here with us and help break down everything about polls.
It's great to be here, Josh.
All right, so first off, the big question, kind of going back to basics here, can you explain exactly how these polls work, how the data is collected, and really just kind of the science behind it?
Well, first and foremost, we want a representative sample of the population of interest, whether that be of America, the United States in general, or of Virginians, or of residents of New Jersey, or New Yorkers. We design a sample to be able to cover those populations. Now, we go out and we talk to people in many different ways today. Sometimes we go and we knock on doors. Sometimes we call by phone or mobile phone. Sometimes we put ads online and talk to response online. So there's a multitude of ways we go out to talk to people. But most importantly, we want to represent a sample of the people that we ultimately want to talk about.
On that same note here, what would make maybe one poll more reliable than the other one?
That's a tough one, obviously. I think the first thing you need to do as a civic-minded consumer of information, if you're looking at a poll, try to see how it was done. A good pollster, a good polling outfit will always detail how they did that poll. That will give you some sort of a notion about their degree of transparency. But ultimately, Josh, any given poll can be right on the mark or a little bit off the mark. So we probably should take the totality of all the polls, take the average of all the polls. That's probably the best summary judgment or understanding of what's going on at any given moment. And there's a lot of places where you can find data like that. You can go to Real Clear Politics or the New York Times. There's any one of a number of different places to go to look at sort of the average of the polls.
I did also want to ask you, why do the polls sometimes get the elections very wrong? Because if you look at the presidential election just last year, just about every poll seemed to show that Kamala Harris had this huge lead or that it would be very close. However, we know just hours after the election ended and polls were closed, the race was called. It was not even close there. So why do the polls sometimes get it wrong?
Yeah, calling a race and what the polls actually say are slightly different because we do live in an electoral college system. You can win a few states and take the entire race. The polls were the difference between Trump and ultimately Harris was about 1.5. The polls were within the reasonable there. But ultimately, you should look at the margin of error. I often describe the margin of error as a strike zone. Think of that ace pitcher for your baseball team. He can't always put that ball in the same place every time. It kind of bounces around. And that's what the polls do. Polls can bounce around at times. There is some sort of spread on them, as such. And every so often we get things wrong. But the historic sort of average or historic experience is that polls do relatively well.
You talked about the margin of error. Explain exactly how that works, how it's calculated, and what people who are reading these polls really need to kind of factor in there.
Yeah, margin of error, once again, is like the strike zone of polls. It gives an idea about the potential spread of a poll. A poll can kind of bounce around. And so if you say plus or minus 3%, that means that the result, let's say for the sake of argument, Trump's approval rating at 45%, at 3 points margin of error can be a 48 or 42. Again, that sort of strike zone where, it's hitting the mark, but any given poll or every given pitch can be a little bit off. Ultimately, it's about this kind of relative notion of precision.
What about the internal campaign polls? How do those differ from maybe the ones that political scientists and different organizations are performing? Are the internal ones any more accurate than the more public ones?
Well, the simple answer is we don't know because they're not public, right? And often they're spun favorable to a given campaign. They're all using the same science. They're all using the same ingredients. That is, the sausage making is the same. I would assume if you were compare public polls with private polls, that is polls that candidates use on average across many elections, they perform basically the same.
With early voting and mail-in ballots being so common now, how do pollsters maybe adjust their models to account for that? Is there any possible way to account for that? Because I do want to point out here that New York City has reported today about 734,000 people voted early. So how does that factor into the polls?
Now, that's a great question. And obviously, we have not only changing ways by which we get in contact with people, it's becoming increasingly diversified, right? It's also that people have the option to vote early. Ultimately, what's important for the pollster is who will vote. The general population is the general population. You can have a very robust sample, a robust reading of the general population, but that is not what matters for elections. Elections ultimately are who will vote. So we use models called likely voter models to get an idea about who will ultimately vote, not just on election day, but who will vote in general, because you can early vote today.
And I want to pull up some of the candidates here once again. Obviously, so many people are following these very closely. So Virginia, as I mentioned, we have Democrat Abigail Spanberger. She has been campaigning all throughout the weekend. She had former President Barack Obama with her. You also have Winsome Earl Sears, the Republican who is the current lieutenant governor in Virginia. She campaigned with the current governor, Glenn Youngkin. So New Jersey has a Democrat governor. Virginia has a Republican governor. Based on what you're seeing so far and your expertise, would you expect that that is going to remain the same here after tomorrow?
Yeah, that's a great question. Obviously, the campaigns in both states are attempting to nationalize the election, but ultimately, voters are worried about bread and butter issues, pocketbook issues. The critical issue today in the United States, not just in these states, but in the United States, is affordability, is the ability to make ends meet. And an issue like that doesn't necessarily favor the incumbent party. That doesn't necessarily mean that the challenging party will win, but it doesn't put them in a good place. So Virginia makes sense. The Democrats are out of power. They're polling really well. That makes sense in that context. New Jersey's very, very close. Indeed, many other indicators, Josh, such as matchup on key issues like affordability, like the approval rating of the sitting governor today, who's Democrat, indicate more a Republican lean than a Democrat lean. So yes, there is the possibility that we might have ultimately a switch in who controls each state. It might just be the Democrats in Democrats in Virginia and the Republicans in New Jersey.
You just never know. And talking about the New York City race, before I let you go here, did want to ask you, as you look at all of this and pay such close attention, why is it that so many Americans are paying close attention to this race? And what will the outcome tell us, if anything?
Yeah, well, there's a lot of things you can learn from these off-diagonal, off-year elections. I think New York is a bellwether. Critically, Mondami has a message, has a framing that might be interesting to Democrats longer term. He really is tapping into the belief that the system is broken. He's talking about price controls and other sort of related policies to deal with it. That's very much a Democrat or a left-leaning framing of a broken system. On the flip side, Trump has been able to frame it for the right, for Republicans, in terms of culture and immigration specifically. So I think that's why many are watching this election. If Mondami is successful, to what extent can it be exported, at least a message about a broken system, exported to other elections?
All right. Cliff Young, thank you so much for taking the time to join us and breaking it all down. We're all watching very closely all of those races and others here. Anything we missed? Anything you want to make sure to add here before I let you go?
No, ultimately, I think that the nationalization of these elections is overplayed. We always have to remember that, people vote typically pocketbook issues. They're worried about their families. And ultimately, I think the outcomes of these elections will be a function of really just that. People's anxieties and worries about making their day-to-day lives move forward.
All right. Cliff, thank you again for being here with us. We definitely appreciate it.
Thank you.